in the Rajatarangini is about the irrigation work carried out during the reign of Avantivarma of Utpala dynasty by the engineer Suya. To control the excess of flood, this Suya emptied vessels of dinar in the current of the river Vitasta. Then, when people came to know this, they, with the greed for getting those golden coins, they cleared the riverbed. This was an idea to drain off the water. Then he got the boulders removed from the river and controlled it by constructing a stone dam. After constructing stone embankment as a countermeasure against the rolling boulders for damming the Mahapadma Lake, then he opened the dam. Wherever he learnt of the breaches of inundation during the disastrous floods, he constructed channels for Vitasta, Bias. It has been told that Suya also displaced the confluence of the river Vitasta and Sindhu, its important tributary. The change thus made at the confluence can still clearly be traced. Suya built stone embankments for 7 yojanas long to bring under control the water of Mahapadma Lake. He built dikes by which water was checked. After he had villages watered, taking into consideration the soil from each village according to the time it took to dry up after floods, he determined the period required for irrigation. He decided for each village the extent and distribution of canal water. He enjoined the principle of controlled water supply. It shows the great scale and the systematic basis of Suya's regulation. The facilities thus secured for cultivation produced a remarkable reduction in the price of rice. Kallana has mentioned that the cost, which was almost 200 dinars, came down to 36 dinars in consequence. The result of the dam was a good increase in land available for cultivation and increased protection against disastrous floods, which have ever been the main cause of famine in Kashmir. According to Kallana, Suya supplemented these measures by equally important improvement in the system of irrigation, which is indispensable for the cultivation of paddy, the staple produce of Kashmir. The system of irrigation designed by Suya was designed in such a manner that everyone was supplied with a fair share of water. Thus, we can say that Suya was a real descendant of Bhagiratha. Then we come to about the wells and ponds, about which again I am not going to say much. Just one reference from Matsya Purana, which is very famous, Vapi Kupa Tadagani, Devata Yatanani cha, Annapradanam Aramaha, Purtamityabhidhiyate. There are two types of deeds, Ishta and Purta. Ishta is following the Vedic rituals, and Purta is what is it meant, construction of these. So, construction of wells, lakes and ponds was considered meritorious, and that was known as Purta in ancient India. And if you see the principle behind it, it is nothing but the conservation and preservation of water. They are held as mainly public utility works and are dedicated to public. There is a separate chapter, as Dr. Pathak mentioned in the morning, Vapi Kupa Tadaga Nirnaya, in the treatise called Mayamatam. Mahabharata refers to the tribal races who were encouraged and paid to dig wells for public use. The reference of Prapa, Panpoi, is found in Rigveda and also in Mahabharata in Shanti Parva. The authors of the texts such as Mayamata, Bruhad Samhita, Samarangana Sutradhara, they have written a lot about the water architecture and how these people have inspired and motivated the masses to earn merit by constructing wells and ponds is really worth noticing. I come to the last point, that is lift irrigation, water lifting devices. There is a belief, whether I can call it misbelief, that the water lifting devices and machines like water wheel, etc., came from Persia to India. But I got a reference in Rigveda, the 10th Mandala, 101 hymn, 7th verse, there is a mention of Ashma Chakra, the stone wheel. There is mention of Drona Ahakam, that is wooden buckets. Then there is also mention of Kuchakra, that is a small wheel to which small pitchers are attached. There is a reference of Dhruti, that is wine skin, Pakhala. Then there is also reference of Surmyam, of course earthen pipes. All these are known as the means of lift irrigation. Panini also refers to Ghati Yantra. These Jalaghatas had a peculiar shape. They had a big belly with narrow opening. This was to avoid the evaporation, because most of the water is lost due to the evaporation. So to avoid evaporation, and in the various names of sun, there is a word, Ambuchoro, to which Mr. Chitrai has referred in his speech also. So the greatest water thief is the sun. So to avoid that, this particular shape was given to the pitchers. The word Araghatta, Ara means spoke and Ghatta means pot, pots on the water wheel, which is found in the ancient text like Panchatantra, Harshacharita. They all clearly speak of its existence in India since very ancient times. The Buddhist text Chullavagga in Vinaya Pitaka refers to Chakkavattaka, which is nothing but water wheel according to the commentator Buddha Ghosha. The Padma Purana also mentions Jalayantra Gruha, that is house for machine drawing water from well. A new class of Odayantrikas came into being during the time or during the period of Kautilya. The officer who maintained the water lifting devices and water network. Kautilya enjoins the appointment of certain officials as Nadipala, who probably used to keep the river free from getting contaminated. There is a word Sitadhyaksha, who had general control over the government irrigation works. Fine was laid upon them who made the water impure from public places, and Manusmruti sentences banishment to those people who do not help the king when the irrigation work is being destroyed by robbers or somebody. I conclude, from all these references and discussion, we come to know that river water was made use in plenty by digging canals, lakes, tanks and ponds since Vedic times. In smaller cities where groundwater was sufficient, well water was used for irrigation. Water was procured and preserved in large reservoirs. Dams were constructed, and the ancient Indians were aware that when water is pushed from one direction, it reaches in all directions. When dropped from height, it exerts pressure. Water can be stored, it can be supplied, it can be directed or compelled to react, and in this way, its force can be used in irrigation works. Such storages, etc., has to be restored because the power and value of water is greater. So all these properties of water were exploited in ancient irrigation system. The Jalavidya or Bhagiratha Vidya of our ancestors was literally practiced throughout the year. The importance of irrigation, its necessity and awareness is the basis of ancient water management. There is a Subhashit in Sanskrit which indicates the principle behind the irrigation exercise. It says, Uparjitanam vittanam tyaga evahi rakshanam tatakodara samsthanam parivahaha iva ambhasam. Just as money is given away in donation is only for its safeguarding because it is being used in some different context. Just as the water in the lake is made to flow away through canals only for its good use. So the simile also confirms that water was as valuable as money for our ancestors. As the descendants of Bhagiratha and of those wise kings who have shown us the importance of harnessing and harvesting of water, even in those ancient days, it befalls us to contribute and carry forward this legacy of water of our glorious past with Bhagiratha efforts and prove ourselves to be worthy successors to them. Dhanyavad.
The paper is open for discussion. We can encourage 1 or 2 questions. Chidyante sarva samshayaha. Yeah.
That is the advantage, I said, no question of presenting last.
Right.
Thank you very much for listening patiently.
Explain the divinity, the medical values of water and its association with life. So it is the lifeline of life, I would say. So irrigation system was also regarded as a part of the social responsibility of a king, and irrigation is known as Bhagiratha Vidya, and that is something which is very unique. And she has mentioned that good country does not depend on rainfall. So I would like to say that the Chandogya Upanishad has mentioned about water as tapapanodaha bhuyastvam. So water has got cooling, healing qualities, and water is abundant. So where there is abundance, there is no requirement for management, but management begins when there is scarcity and absence. Then the Dhammapad also mentions about water management in one gatha, which says Udakam hi nayanti netrukaha ishukaraha namayanti tejanam daru namayanti takshakaha atmanam damayanti purushaha. So Panditaha. So Udakam hi nayanti netrukaha, where there is a reference to how canals are carved out to carry water. Madam mentioned about Adeva Matrukaha. We also have reference in the Kiratarjuniyam where there is Akrushta Pachaha Bhumi and Adeva Matruka. So the rule of Duryodhan was such a well managed rule in the absence of Yudhishthir that land could be cultivated without rain water. So that was the irrigation technique used in ancient times. So she has raised, Deshpande Madam has raised a very vital point regarding Bhagiratha diverting the river currents. We can also think that maybe such a sort of technique may have been used for Godavari. So Ruchi Gautam got the river Godavari. So it can also be a part of engineering technique. So the paper was really interesting, and it touched the different aspects of Sanskrit literature, be it classical literature, be it technical literature like Brihat Samhita or Kautilya Arthashastra or Rajatarangini. So I'm very thankful to you, madam, and thank you once again, and I declare this session to be over. felicitate the paper presenters.
Our valedictory session without wasting any time. And I thank Dr. Narsale Madam for conducting this session very efficiently. And I request Vijay to make necessary changes, and then we will request to address and request him to come to the dais. And now I request she will introduce and she will invite him. She will introduce him and she will invite him. I request Sonal Kapadia to introduce our today's chief guest, Dr. Professor Shinde, first.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a very fruitful and knowledgeable day today. We come to the last leg of the journey. And this is the valedictory session. Professor Vasant Shinde is going to deliver the valedictory address. I take great pride in introducing a person as scholarly as you, sir. Professor Vasant Shinde, presently Vice Chancellor of Deccan College, deemed University Pune, is a world-renowned archaeologist and one of the foremost scholars in South Asia. He has been teaching the postgraduate course in archaeology since 1982, and he has guided a number of MA, PGD, MPhil students, and 30 PhD students have already completed their research under his supervision. He has also provided guidance to no less than 15 visiting scholars from foreign countries. Professor Shinde has been a pioneer in archaeological research since the last 39 years, specializing in the proto-history of South Asia as well as field archaeology. He has completed 16 major research projects. He has also traveled to and delivered lectures to various countries all over the globe. And he has worked with more than 17 international museums around the world. He has been awarded a number of honors and scholarships from various national and international bodies in the course of his academic career. Two of the most noteworthy ones being 100 Most Influential Vice Chancellor by World Education Congress and Devang Mehta National Education Award for Outstanding Contribution to Education. Professor Shinde has delivered no less than 157 special lectures in different parts of India and in 40 institutes abroad. His contributions to archaeology comprise of 10 books, 2 monographs, 14 edited books, journals, 126 papers in national journals, and 61 research papers in international journals alone. He has established the Society of South Asian Archaeology, SOSA, with a view to promoting young archaeologists. Professor Shinde has vast administrative experience and has organized 3 convocations of the university. Sir, it is a privilege for me to introduce an archaeologist of your stature on this day today. Thank you. Welcome to the dais, sir. I request you to felicitate Professor Shinde.
Dr. Kane, the president of the institute, Dr. Mrs. Deshpande, Professor Uma Vaidya, distinguished delegates and the friends. First, I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Dr. Mrs. Deshpande, for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to interact with you. a very important topic of the discussion today. The topic which is very much relevant also. Somebody rightly said that we have really very important thinking about water management in the past, but that ancient wisdom in fact has been forgotten, and because of that now we are facing a lot of crisis. And it is said that perhaps in the third world, in fact, war might erupt, in fact, over the distribution of water. So that is the, significance of this topic. And, a lot of people have been discussing about this. There are very interesting presentation today, right from the early historic to the late medieval period. And it has shown, in fact, how, there is a lot of continuity, in fact, continuity in the thinking of the water harvesting, water management. But I will speak a little bit, I'll give some examples, in fact, from the past, particularly from the early farming communities, and also from the Harappan and the Chalcolithic levels that we have worked on. So once the climate became active, in fact, the monsoon became active around maybe 15,000 years ago. And the work that we have done on the reconstruction of the climatic sequence, we have almost reconstructed the climate for the last 10,000 years. And it is suggested that around from 9,000 BC, maybe from 11,000 years, the climate is quite stable. There is little fluctuation, of course, little here and there. And that has, impacted the human cultures right from the early stage. And the beginning of agriculture goes back to around 7,000 BC, in fact, in the Indian subcontinent. And the credit, of course, goes to the introduction of monsoon system, both the summer monsoon and the winter monsoon system 15,000 years ago. And this system, in fact, has enabled, in fact, introduction of agriculture in this part of the world. Now, as I said, that we have done some reconstruction of the past climatic sequence, and the climate reconstruction suggests that from 7,000 to 3,000 BC, the climate was quite active. There was more rainfall. And because of that, we see the emergence of agriculture communities, different agriculture, maybe traditions, in fact, coming into existence in different parts of the world. And, the beginning, in fact, which goes back to 7,000 or even 7,500 BC, that has culminated ultimately into the formation of the Harappan tradition. And that happened maybe around 3,000 BC. So from this curve, in fact, you can make out that climate up to 3,000 BC was quite congenial. And because of that, we see the flourishment of the cultures in different parts. And then, of course, from 3,000 to 1,000 BC, of course, the climate was 3,000 to 2,000 BC, the climate remained more or less stable. And after that, of course, the climate began to decline. And that also has the adverse impact on the cultures. Now, that particular phenomena, the decline of the climatic condition around 2000 BC or 4000 BP, now that was not a local phenomena. In fact, we have records from different parts of the world. And everywhere around 4000 BP or 2000 BC, the climate has become dry, and most of the major civilizations, cultures have collapsed around that time, including the Harappan culture. Now, I'll just come directly to the Harappan region. The northwest part of the Indian subcontinent was occupied by the Harappans, and as I said that the Harappans flourished mostly in the northeast part. The two river system, the Indus and the Saraswati, or what we call as the Ghaggar today. Now, these two were the main important basis of the Harappans, in fact, the main important agriculture basis of the Harappans. And this has enabled, in fact, the Harappans to develop into urban phase. And there are, of course, two major rivers, Indus and the Saraswati. These are the big rivers. But we see very few settlements, in fact, on the banks of Indus and also on the banks of the Saraswati River, because they were very mighty rivers and they used to get frequently flooded. And therefore, people have chosen, in fact, intentionally to say, establish the settlement slightly away from the main rivers. Most of the settlements are, in fact, found in the tributary zone, which are considered to be very safe. And so because of that, and because this, both the regions are covered with the very fertile alluvium soil, and even today, in fact, these two regions are considered to be the main regions, in fact, one of the best, in fact, in the world. And in this part, of course, we see the development of the agriculture. And right from the beginning, of course, now we have been talking about the ponds and the lakes. So we have taken some, coring, in fact, some of the lakes, and some of the lakes are present, in fact, for last 10,000 years. So some of the lakes are found near the lakes, which were intentionally made by the people right from the early stage. Now, because the climate was quite congenial, the Harappans, were able to develop into urban phase. And this is one of the examples, of course, Dr. Milin has shown about, this particular picture. And also, the Harappans have, I consider Harappans as the most important culture, not only because, I am studying this particular culture, but foundation of the Indian culture and tradition. And there has been continuity for last 5,000 years. We are talking about the continuity. So right from the beginning of the Harappan, civilization, till modern times, in fact, there is a continuity in tradition, continuity in basic sciences and technologies which were introduced by the Harappans. Some of the technologies are very much relevant even today in major parts of South Asia. And our efforts is not only to reconstruct the lifestyle of the Harappans, but how we can, revive these some of the traditions which are very relevant, and how those traditions or the technologies particularly, they are relevant, and how these technologies can be put to use. And as you know that, a lot of communities are still dependent on these technologies. So from that point of view, of course, the Harappan, are very, very important. So they are the ones, in fact, who have built these type of mega cities. This is the picture from the site of Dholavira, one of the best cities. In fact, I consider this as the best Harappan city, stone city, compared to Rakhigarhi and Mohenjo-daro. This was perhaps the most magnificent city of the Harappans developed. And interestingly, this particular city was developed, in fact, in a desert part. Today, of course, it is a complete desert, but during the Harappan times also, the climate was not much drastically different from what is today. And why they have to develop the city, I'll just come to that part later. But, this water harvesting and water management system. And this is the one system, which the Harappas developed, the well system, which continues without any change in this part of the world, and also maybe different parts of South Asia. This was the picture, which was shown by Dr. Milin. But what is important, in fact, I consider this as the earliest evidence of the swimming pool. The concept of swimming pool, I don't think that it has come from the West, but it is very much there, in fact. This particular structure, I was fortunate to visit the site of Mohenjo-daro 2 times. And this particular well, in fact, Dr. Milin was talking about. So there is a system, in fact. They were drawing, water from this well and replacing the water from this tank periodically. And also there are a number of rooms on the outside, you can see here. So these rooms are, they were proper rooms. So they were meant for maybe changing purpose, like, the same concept as, we find, in fact, in the case of swimming pool today. So this particular concept is very much, Indian, originated long back. And then, of course, the two systems that they introduce in each household. Of course, we have the bathing, area or the bathrooms, and see the tiles. In fact, this is again the earliest evidence of tiles that was introduced by the Harappans, earliest evidence of its kind anywhere in the world. And there is a continuity in this particular tradition. And also, we always think that the commode system has come from the West. That is also not true. You can see this is the earliest evidence of a commode. And there is in the latrine, of course, there is a big pot in which there is a small lota. And even today, in fact, in our toilet, in fact, the same system exists. So there is a continuity, and this is the system, in fact, the Harappans have developed. And they also, in fact, you can see, in fact, they had there is a drainage, separate drainage for toilet, and separate drainage, in fact, for the bathing platforms. So closed drainage for the toilet, you can see here, this is one of the examples of that, and the open drainage for the bathing platforms. And they had the network, in fact, within the city. But this is the picture from the site of Lothal. But in each city, we see that, there is a main drainage line, and there is a network. In fact, each, toilet and bathroom, in fact, is connected, by the network of drainage system. And that was connected to the main drainage. And the main drainage was taken outside the city wall and emptied somewhere. And because of this system, we always think that, the Harappan cities were very clean and hygienic. We are studying, in fact, we have excavated number of skeletal remains from the site of Rakhigadi. And some of the scientists from Korea are working on the paleopathology of the Harappans. And they're very disappointed to notice that, the Harappans were not really suffering from any disease. Very rarely, in fact, they had no serious disease, in fact. And the credit of, for that goes to their, very clean and hygienic city. Today, of course, we have to launch the programs like, this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and, green cities, etc. But that concept was very much there. If we can pick up some, maybe leap from that, perhaps our life will be much better, in fact. Now, this is the system, in fact. This is the main drainage line, in fact, was, this is the actual evidence from the site of Harappa. And this drainage line was emptied outside, and, it was connected to the main, this is the main drainage, and the drainage network was connected to this. And then, of course, perhaps the best example of the water, harvesting and water management comes from the site of Dholavira. This was unique in the past, in the contemporary world, and also it is unique even today. In fact, if we can, apply this particular method, I think our life again will be completely different. We will really have a very good life. Now, this particular city, they had to develop this particular city because this is located on the main trade. Harappans had given a lot of importance to the trade. And one of the reasons, in fact, why the Harappans could flourish was because of the trade also. So what they had to do, in fact, this trade line, main, trade route, in fact, from Sindh to Saurashtra, because Saurashtra has most of the natural resources required for manufacturing of the basic crafts. And some of the important cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were located on that side. So they had to develop this particular city. And these are at least 4 or 5, important settlements, in fact, on the trade route. And all the settlements were highly fortified. Probably, the merchants who were traveling, in fact, with the goods, they were perhaps taking shelter, in fact, in the night in these places. And this was the mega city where there is also evidence of the manufacturing of a lot of crafts. But the location that they chose was very important. There are 2 streams flowing by the site of the city. And in this part, in the desert part, there is occasional rainfall. And whenever there is rainfall, there is a flash flood, in fact, coming to these, streams. So what the Harappans have done, in fact, there is evidence of damming, in fact. They have put series of dams on both the rivers. And they have diverted the entire water, in fact. Wherever there is a flash flood, the entire water was diverted inside the settlement. Now this is the, they have followed the, simple principle of, principle of gravity, and accordingly they have placed their dams. Now this is the picture, in fact, I took, in the rainy season. In fact, this is how these, these streams get the water during the rainy season. And this is what the Harappans must have done. In fact, they must have raised this type of dams or check dams at regular intervals, and made sure that this check dam is meant for two purposes. One is that they intentionally allowed water to go down in the ground, so that the water level is risen, and also the water was diverted inside the settlement, which could be used for the domestic purpose. So this is how, in fact, within the settlement, there are a number of underground water tanks that the Harappans have dug. This is the reconstruction of that. Now these are some of the tanks, in fact. What is interesting now, in this case, this is almost 4 meters deep, and they have dug into solid rock. And we wonder, in fact, because the Harappans did not have iron or steel implements with them, and digging or excavating these type of tanks without iron or steel is impossible. But they have again followed the simple, what we call as the Indian knowledge system, and that knowledge system continues even today. So what they have done, they have taken out the blocks, in fact, by following the simple method. In fact, they made grooves on the periphery of the block, and the grooves were quite wide and deep, and they inserted wooden pegs, and they kept pouring water so that the stone cracks. So they took out the blocks from that, and then with the help of the bronze chisels, they have smoothened the surface and the bottom of these tanks. So this is how the Harappans have used very simple but very effective method for excavating. So much efforts, in fact, were invested by the Harappans, because they wanted to make this as a city without facing any problems. And in this, of course, why we say that these tanks were always used for water, because in one of the tanks we have found the thick deposit of silt, which is formed because of the continuous water inside. Some of the, this is one of perhaps the biggest underground tank that the Harappans have excavated or built. And then Dr. Milind has shown the evidence of this step well. We always thought that step well in Gujarat, in fact, particularly starts only around 6th or 7th century AD, but this is the genesis of that, going back to almost 3000 BC. These are the tanks of different sizes and different shapes. One of the biggest well, in fact. Why I want to show this particular well? Because this well was not only was used for, this is the biggest Harappa well used for storing water, and quite deep. And whenever perhaps the tanks go dry, they took out, they lifted the water from this well, and they put the water, in fact, here in the water channel system that they have. Now why we say, so this is that well, and why we say that they have lifted the water, because on this flat stone there are these grooves, in fact, which have occurred because of the pulling of water with the help of the maybe some bucket, maybe wooden bucket or leather bucket tied to a rope. And those rope marks are found, in fact, on this very deep and very visible grooves on them. So they were putting that water, in fact, in this particular water channel, and then that water was traveling to this tank and to another tank, because each and every tank was connected by underground water channel system. So that is the system, in fact, the Harappans have developed. This is the part of that underground this water channel system, and you can see, in fact, they have provided the air ducts at regular intervals so that they can clean them and prevent the blockage of this underground water channel system. And see this is part of that system, excavated almost 7 feet high. And you can see now because of the flow of water, the stones have eroded, they have become smooth because of the flow of water. So there is no doubt about the use of this particular, underground water channel system. And then probably, they were also getting perhaps, extra water, maybe the water, maybe what we call as the storm water. So to, get rid of that, of course, they also have developed the system. In fact, this is one of the earliest, perhaps the only system of its kind anywhere in the world. So this is that type of system that the Harappans have developed. And then they made sure that the extra water, in fact the storm water, does not disturb the settlement. So they have provided this outlet for that. And then, of course, as is said, that water is responsible for the decline of the culture, and so is the case, in fact, in the case of the Harappans. So around 2000 BC, the Harappan culture started declining, and earlier it was thought that that the Aryans are responsible for the destruction of the Harappan culture, and Mortimer Wheeler, in fact, used this particular evidence to base his hypothesis that the Aryans killed the Dravidians. In fact, he thought that the Harappan civilization was built by the Dravidians, the local people. But actually, this skeleton remains were studied later by physical anthropologists. One famous American physical anthropologist, Kenneth Kennedy, and he says that there is no injury marks on the body of these skeletal remains, and they all are lying, in fact, in the flood deposit. So his hypothesis is that perhaps these people have died because of suffocation, not because of the injury marks, which is true, because Mohenjo-daro, in fact, has a history of the floods. Three major floods, in fact, occurred. In fact, two happened, in fact, during the Harappan phase, in fact, very flourishing Harappan phase, maybe around 2400 BC. And Harappans could, there was a major damage to the city, but Harappans could redevelop that city because their economy was booming, in fact, that time. And the last flood, in fact, occurred around 2000 BC when the economy started declining, and Harappans could not redevelop that particular city. And these are some of the people, in fact, who must have died that time. And as I say that, we have the data, in fact, from different parts of the world, and everywhere, in fact, in China, in Mongolia, in West Asia, in western part of Rajasthan, in Europe, everywhere, in fact, it is indicated that, around 4000 BP, in fact, the climate became dry. And what is one of the important, consequence of the drying of the climate is that you can see this is the reconstruction of the, the water channels, in fact, or the rivers in the Saraswati basin. Now, this particular reconstruction is done scientifically by these, ISRO scientists, and they have taken the satellite imagery photographs, and with that, in fact, they are able to reconstruct that. So there was a main river, in fact, the main river, which is today it is called the Ghaggar River. So that river was called ancient Rigvedic Saraswati, and its major tributary today it is called Chautang, on the bank of which is located the biggest Harappan city of Rakhigarhi. And Chautang is known, in fact, as the Drushyadwati. So the Saraswati and Drushyadwati were the main rivers, in fact, here. But apart from that, there were a number of small rivers. And when we look at the distribution of the sites, Harappan sites, we see that a lot of sites are, in fact, found in these small, maybe tributaries, not on the main river. And this river, we do not know when this river has gone dry. There is a mention about the dry river Saraswati, but there is no clue about when this particular river has gone dry. But we can use the archaeological data to date this particular event. Now we have, see, the Harappan culture is divided into three phases. In fact, the early Harappan phase, which is the formative phase, then the mature Harappan, which is the most prosperous phase, and the late Harappan. So the early Harappan phase is between 5,500 to 2,600 BC. So we have a lot of sites of the early Harappan phase on the in this particular area, and also a lot of sites of the mature Harappan phase from 2,600 BC to 2000 BC. And suddenly, in fact, the settlements are going away from this particular region after 2000 BC. So that indicates perhaps the river is going dry, and therefore, these people are going away from the river banks. So that is the kind of evidence we are getting. And again, in fact, the climate, the rainfall has, maybe reduced, and it has maybe adverse impact on the agriculture system. In fact, the Harappans had two major, agricultural bases in the form of Indus Plain and the Saraswati Plain, and they have to desert, in fact, this, and they have to go away from that. And the other, adverse impact was that of the climatic condition that was the lowering of the sea level. Now, there is a scientific data, in fact, which we have obtained from the Saurashtra coast in collaboration with the geologists from different parts of the world. And around 2000 BC, the sea level has gone down by almost 3 meters. And the impact of this, adverse impact of this sea level going down was that there were a number of ports which were established by the Harappans on the western coast and also on the Makaran coast, which fell into disuse because the sea level has gone down. And we have counted nearly 30 Harappan ports on this, which all became inland settlements after the sea level has gone down. So that must have affected, badly, their international trade. And one of the important, reasons for the Harappans to develop into a civilization or urban phase was the prosperity. The Harappans were very clever, in fact, merchants. They were doing very beneficial trade with the Harappans. In fact, a lot of Harappan goods were sent, whereas we find very few evidence of the goods coming from that part. So surplus certainly beneficial to the Harappans. And what they did, in fact, Harappans, what they did was they did not create those type of monumental architecture like the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians have done, like pyramids or the ziggurats. But what they did, in fact, is that they used this wealth, in fact, they were getting from the West for welfare of the common people. So they have used that wealth for the development of cities and towns, very clean and hygienic cities for the common people. And also that wealth was used for creating those beautiful, civic amenities within the Harappan cities. So that was the, idea. And some of the public architecture that was built by the Harappans, like fortification wall, for example, or this type of water management system, that was meant for the people, not for any particular class. So that is the, difference between the Harappans and the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. It is not that the Harappans were not competent or capable of building those type of architecture or life-size images. They were very much competent, perhaps much more than the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. But their thinking was different. So we want to highlight on this particular thinking of the Harappans. So this is the kind of evidence that we get. And what I suggest, in fact, if we can apply this particular technique, particular method of the water harvesting and water management system that the Harappans developed, today, in fact, in the major part of the desert part, it will be completely different picture. Now today, between Dholavira and the nearest town is Rapar, which is 110 kilometers. So between Rapar and Dholavira, there are hardly 4 or 5 villages. And people are not establishing settlements there because of the dearth of water. But if every village, in fact, if we adopt this particular system, I'm sure that, that the entire Kutch can be a green land. So this is something, which is very important, and we have suggested to the, Niti Ayog also that this type of simple and very effective method can be adopted. We should learn from the ancient wisdom, ancient past. And it is very, very simple. It does not really require, a lot of funding. It does not require maybe foreign collaboration because this is very much Indian. But at the same time, this is very effective. And this can be built by the community. This is what the Harappas have done. There is no evidence of slavery, in fact, unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia. But the Harappas could get this work done through the community efforts only. And that is the best example we have, in fact. And there should be continuity in that. So that is one example I wanted to show you. The other example, in fact, I would like to mention here is the evidence from the site of Inamgaon. Now, after the decline of the Harappans, the major development started taking place in the area which has mostly black cotton soil. So Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and South India, in fact, in this part. Now, it was suggested that Didi Kosami, in fact, had suggested that the Chalcolithic people who flourished from 1700 BC up to 700 BC. Now, Didi Kosami suggested that the Chalcolithic people may not have cultivated the black cotton soil because it is very hard and sticky, according to him, and it cannot be cultivated without the use of iron plows. So he said that the black cotton soil must have been cultivated only when the iron was brought to use around maybe 4th or 5th century BC on large scale. But there is very, very interesting observation, in fact, made by one British agricultural scientist. His name was Wallace. That was the observation made in 1887. He wrote a book, in fact, in India in 1887, published in 1888, in which he was fascinated by the qualities of the black cotton soil. And there, in fact, he mentions that the black cotton soil plows itself, and he has explained the procedure, that there is a lot of evaporation, in fact, takes place in the black, in this part. And because of that, the moisture which is there, in fact, in the soil, that gets, away from the soil, and the soil develops, big and wide cracks. And in the rainy season, in fact, because of the, water, the cracks are filled in, the soil becomes loose. So the contraction and, and the expansion of the soil, that process, in fact, makes it very loose. And he suggested, in fact, Wallace, that this soil can be plowed with the help of Dutch hoe, which is, sort of a wooden implement for digging purpose. And that makes sense because, there are a number of sites, Deccan Chalcolithic sites, located in the proximity of the black cotton soil. And it is quite clear that, the early farmers, because the sites are located in the proximity, the early farmers must have exploited the black cotton soil. And one of the classical sites, in fact, is the site of Inamgaon, where the Deccan College carried out extensive work. And we have been able to reconstruct the socio-economic organization of the early farming communities for which there is no written records, entirely developed on the basis of the archaeological data that we have. Now, this site is located on the bank of river Ghod, which is a tributary of Bhima. And you can see the location of the mounds. In fact, there are 5 mounds, 4 mounds located here, and 1 mound located outside. And this particular, there was a lot of water, in fact, that time, during the Chalcolithic time. And this river used to get frequently flooded.